Welcome to Catholic Views. I'm your host, Renae Kranz. On today's show, we will have Chris Moats and Father John Rutten in the studio with us. We are going to talk about a brand new saint in the church. His name is Charles de Foucauld. He's a Frenchman, very interesting, very human, really, really great conversation. So I hope you will stick around for that interview. First, we have Dr. Chris Bergwald.
How do you spell? Sorry.
I've had to spell it a lot lately, and I have it right in front of me, so that's not really fair.
That'd be cheating. Yeah, because it's a French name.
Foucauld.
LD, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
It's a very, you look at it and you're like, how do I say that?
French.
So, what do you have for us today for Biblical Bites?
So we are, I am going to skip the normal question that I begin with. It's the fifth Sunday of Easter,
Okay,
Renae.
so I would have gotten
I know
it
you
right.
were one. You would have gotten it right. So last week and this week, the first reading for Sunday Mass is from Acts. Last week is chapter 14. Maybe it was 13.
I feel like it was 13. For some reason.
And this week is 14 for sure. So this is, and we talked about it a little bit last week, but I didn't explain the context. This is St. Paul's first missionary journey. Oh. So in Acts of the Apostles, Peter is sort of center of the stage at the beginning, Prince of the Apostles and so on, and the mission to the Jews and the opening of the mission to the Gentiles, right? So Jesus came first to the Jews, but then the message is going to, as we read at the beginning of Acts, throughout Judea, Samaria, and then to the ends of the earth.
Right.
So it's Jerusalem, Judea, and all of Samaria, and then the ends of the earth. It's sort of a concentric circles.
Right.
So Peter is starting Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, and he opens it to the Gentiles, and then Paul runs with that. Right. So it's St. Paul who is known as the Apostle of the Gentiles. Peter's the one who sort of, the Lord, through Peter, opens the door to the gospel be proclaimed to Gentiles, but it's Peter who sort of takes that and runs with it.
Paul.
Thank you. Paul.
Yep.
So Paul has, in Acts of the Apostles, what for centuries has been described as his three great missionary journeys, where he goes out usually from Antioch, and we talked about which Antioch. So Antioch in modern-day Syria, north of Jerusalem, makes these three missionary journeys. So last week, what we were talking about was part of the first missionary journey, and today we read about the conclusion of the first missionary journey. So with that as the context, this is what we read at the beginning of the first reading for Mass. After Paul and Barnabas had proclaimed the good news to that city and made a considerable number of disciples, they returned to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch. They strengthened the spirits of the disciples and exhorted them to persevere in the faith, saying it is necessary for us to undergo many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. And I'm going to come back to how it goes on. But so Paul and Barnabas have proclaimed the good news in that city. So that city is Derbe. This is all in modern-day Turkey. Where they were was in Derbe, and they proclaimed the good news, made many disciples. Then they returned to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch of Pisidia. What we don't read about is the fact that they're returning to Lystra, where Paul had been stoned.
Oh, that's right.
So the last stop had been where they before they actually before they came to Derbe, which is where we are at the beginning of the reading, they had been in Lystra, and Paul, the Jews incited basically people to stone Paul, and they thought they killed Paul. Before that, he'd been Iconium, and they fled for their lives because they thought they were going to be stoned. So what did Paul and Barnabas do? They go back to these places.
Okay.
So what do they? But where when they've been in Iconium and Lystra before, it had been the public proclamation. Well, now we read they strengthened the spirits of the disciples and exhorted them to persevere in the faith, saying, "It is necessary for us to undergo many hardships to enter the kingdom of God." You know, like when I was stoned when I was here recently, last time. So what's fascinating to me about that is the reality that Paul returns now. Again, as far as we know, it was more of a quote-unquote private visit. He's not publicly proclaiming the gospel this time, as far as we know.
Right.
He's primarily building up the disciples who they had made at that last stop. But still, I marveled at the fact that St. Paul, if it were me,
I'm not going
Lystra,
back there.
not going back there. Iconium, not going back there. But they did. They returned. Why? To strengthen the brethren.
Because there was other people there.
Exactly.
Spreading word.
Exactly. So, and the other thing we read They appointed elders for them in each church, and with prayer and fasting commended them to the Lord in whom they had put their faith. So Paul and Barnabas appointed elders. The Greek word is presbyteros. So bishops and priests are appointed by prayer and fasting and laying on of hands. So we see here the continued growth of the church and the continued development of the hierarchy that we have today.
Right. That's really interesting. I'm glad you pointed that out. Thanks, Dr. B.
You bet.